room here and doing just a sharing debrief, people sharing their experience of doing that.
A quick point, we're going for 2.5 hours. The last half hour is sort of a debrief.
Okay, great. So before we do the intro, let's see. So do we do the empathy circle intro before or after the introduction? I think before.
No, do the introduction, the presentation first, just so people,
and then the intro, and
yeah.
then the intro to the empathy circle process.
Yeah, next is just the presentation, the 10-minute presentation.
So the person we have today with us to give us an introduction to the topic of We Are a Nonviolent Network is Yanni, and I'm going to let him introduce himself. Thank you for being with us today, Yanni. Yanai, sorry, Yanai, I mispronounced your name.
It's really fine. Thank you, Lou. And yeah, I was happy to be invited to speak on this. It's something very close to my heart. Can I just check that the sound's coming through okay? Yeah, we're good. So yes, my name's Jano Postelnik. I'm the external coordinator for the XR UK Embedding Nonviolence team, and I'm also sitting in the guardianship circle in the UK. And I also have in my life journey spent a lot of time engaged with, in a way, the inner work of what we could call maybe inner nonviolence. And the principle here for me that this We Are a Nonviolent Network is probably one of the key reasons I felt like I can join this this movement, and it maybe have been similar for others here, that this is something really like core to my sense of my values in life. And so it's worth also noting that when we talk about it here in the XR, there's a kind of also a sort of an efficacy based approach to the principle, and that the short summary is using nonviolent strategy and tactics as the most effective way to bring about change. And sometimes there can be some questions about whether it's just a question of efficacy, or if it's also a question about ethics and values. And for me, it certainly is that nonviolence is actually expressing something about how I want to live my life and how I want the world to be. And I think it's also woven into XR in that way. And yet, in a way, the more universally acceptable way of, or the more universally agreeable way of putting it has been one based on efficacy, that we can all agree with something if it's effective. And I think one of the questions in a conversation here will be where we are ourselves, maybe with the sense of doing it only because it's effective, or whether it's also because it's actually something that has a value for us in and of itself. In the sort of the longer expression of what we talk about in the value, it seemed to me useful just to bring out a couple of points before I offer some of my own reflections, and that acknowledging that using nonviolence is something that reveals where systemic violence is being perpetrated. By choosing not to participate in violence, we in a way show the harm that is done by violence, and that this is actually part of its power, and it's in a way its ethical component is that it also allows things to be seen more clearly. And at the same time, we have a recognition in the movement that there are those people for whom they may be subject to violence, to abuse, or to harm in ways that may not give them the freedom to choose not to engage in forms of action that might look like violence to us. And that the movement as a whole acknowledges that people make their own choice on that, and may need to make different choices than we do, because many of us, and certainly I'd include myself as although I'm of mixed race, I appear white, and for most purposes I can therefore be said to be white. I experienced the privilege of a white middle-class educated male, and therefore have greater likelihood of avoiding violence than many people for whom that is not their particular demographic. And so what we also have in our principle is a sense of wanting to stand in solidarity with those for whom the choice of non-violence is not so straightforward as it is for someone in a privileged position, such as myself, and maybe others of us here will recognize that privilege also. And without wanting to condone violence, we also, as a movement, take the formal position of not condemning it. And I think that's kind of useful to bear in mind when we contemplate the topic. Part of what arises when I think about it is, first of all, just trying to get a sense of what do we mean, and I'm not going to try and give some absolute definition, but for me, what comes as a literal meaning is it's like about the application of force or power. That violence is when we use force or power to hurt or to harm without the consent of someone it's being applied to, and it can be physical or psychological. And that non-violence is the conscious choice to refrain from causing harm, and we'd say probably particularly physical harm in the way it's often used, but I would include psychological harm, and also refraining from threatening to do this, which would be a form of psychological harm, and renouncing this use of violence as the way of attaining one's objective. So saying we won't participate in the very common cycle of violence being met by further violence that we see in the world. And that, again, for me, is something so deeply distressing to be aware of, to see, even though it's completely understandable that violence generates violent responses, recognizing that somehow it never comes to an end. And I think I'm not going to quote exactly, but Gandhi observed once, an eye for an eye. If we take an eye for an eye, it will leave the whole world blind. That way in which the cycle of violence never comes to an end, unless we make a principled and conscious choice not to employ it. And so another element that comes up in this for me is I'm also a non-violent direct action trainer, and also involved in training in non-violence and de-escalation activists to be part of actions that what is actually non-violent is really a conversation. We all seem to have different views on it, ideas on it, and you'll probably remember the spectrum lines from non-violent direct action trainings, where we can see a range of different views of what we consider to be violent. And I think that's something helpful to bear in mind. It's not always obvious. And that the position we take as a movement here, as I understand it, is that if the general public would as a whole consider something to be violent, therefore we will not engage in this. And it's interesting giving it that kind of subjectivity, I think, but useful here. So some of the questions that arise again, the ethical element of it, as I see it, is very much dependent on intention, and it's maybe useful here that we separate that out, because there may not be any intention to cause harm, but something might still be violent. There's a sort of a great image from the Buddhist tradition, actually, which is one that I'm involved in as a Buddhist teacher, which starts with the question, if someone takes a sharp blade and plunges it into the heart of another person and they die, is this a bad thing? And the question then is opened up by saying, well, it could have been a robber, but it might also have been a surgeon. What do you make of that? If a surgeon plunges their knife into someone's heart trying to save them, and we wouldn't say that was violent, but the act is exactly the same. Even though it used force, there was consent, we'd maybe recognize. So what is actually violence? What is therefore the refraining from it is sometimes nuanced. And there's also the question and the challenge that arises for many of us, I think, in that we can have an instinctive tendency, or even training for some, to use force and therefore potentially use violence to try and protect ourselves or others. And this is something that in our culture we actually recognize as a valid and acceptable and approved, however we want to call it, use of violence or use of force to protect. And there's an issue for people making a commitment to nonviolent engagement around how to respond in the face of violence or oppression that is destructive, that is harmful. and where there may be a place for using force in a shielding, in a protective way. And again, this raises questions. At what level of use of force is this becoming another form of violence itself? And the sort of the practice, as I understand it, of non-violence involves using our own vulnerability, using our willingness to expose ourselves to potential harm or to loss as a way of generating a sort of a social response that we have as human beings, which is when we see someone putting themselves in a place of vulnerability for the well-being of others, we actually gain an empathetic response from the community. We gain a sense of appreciation, of care. We value that. And so this quality or this power of non-violence is partially found in its principled nature, that it says we don't participate in this harmful or destructive behavior, but also that it evokes sympathetic response and engagement from people who observe or are aware of, become aware of someone who's engaged non-violently and yet engaged. So I'm just aware that I might have had my 10 minutes already. I don't know if I was keeping track of the time exactly, but I've just got a couple more things to say, so I hope it's all right. It requires some training for most of us to be able to refrain from reactively striking out or acting in a defensive way when we feel hurt or we feel afraid. And so there's a training that's needed. And some of that is also, for me, it's about reflecting on whether I want to participate in the harm that violence brings. So non-violence is also an inner training, I would say, in how I think, how I relate to others, to what extent I might reject or hold myself apart from others, because I would say that causes a form of violence. It's important also to distinguish non-violence from passivity. It's not about being non-active or inactive. And again, I don't think this is news to you, but I just want to name it because it's one of the interesting areas of this, that there's something very active about consciously choosing to be non-violent. And actually it can require quite a lot of effort, particularly where we might see or feel the injustice of violence and harm being done and wish to prevent it, and yet choose not to do so in a violent or a way that harms others. And in this willingness to use one's own vulnerability to take personal risks without causing harm to others through the use of force, creating a tension, because the system, the forces of our could say unhealthy or toxic system generally tend to employ force and violence in such situations, and it becomes more clear how harmful it is when someone chooses not to participate in this. And so it's not just that it's effective because it gives or generates some degree of moral authority and some degree of empathetic response in the community that's actually really powerful. It's also because, in a way, when we align, as I would say, we align our action with our values, we have actually the greatest power, and it's a non-violent form of power, the power of our authenticity and our courage. And the use of violence, even if it is successful in overcoming some circumstance or overcoming some oppressive regime, generally or very commonly leads to some further kind of repression or harm. It recreates that dynamic because it's based on having power over. And the power that we have that's not over another is actually our own power. The power we have to be open, to be vulnerable, to be courageous and committed in our values. And for me, this seems to be at the heart of the principle of non-violence within the Extinction Rebellion movement, and the courage it takes to bring our vulnerability and offer that in the face of or as a vehicle for protecting the vulnerability of our world, the vulnerability of others in the face of the harm and the violence that is so often tragically being perpetrated. And so I hope those are some useful reflections on the topic of non-violence in Extinction Rebellion, and I'll pause there.
Thank you, Yanai. I'm really moved and touched by what you said, and you've given me a lot to think about, and I'm guessing others too. And perfect follow-up with the empathy circles for people to have a chance to express their thoughts and their feelings and their ideas, anything that people want to say. That's the whole purpose of the empathy circle process. So thank you so much for being with us to share your thinking and your experience with nonviolence. Next, I'd like to have a brief description of the empathy circle process that we'll be using. And Marta, would you be willing to do that?
Yes. Can you hear me? Yeah. So I'll just go briefly over the method for those of you for whom it might be new. What I'll say is that it's different from normal conversation and empathy circle. It's a particular method, it's a particular way of communicating, and the intention is that people feel fully heard when they're sharing. So we'll go into breakout rooms and we'll have a small group of people, 4, maybe 5 people, and each group with a facilitator. And we'll take turns in speaking. So at any given moment, there'll be someone who will be the speaker, and they'll speak for 5 minutes. And before they start speaking, they share, they select someone else in the circle with them to be their listener. And then they share, we've got topic today, and you can speak about that topic. In an empathy circle, you're always welcome as well to speak about anything else that is important to you that you'd like to speak to at the moment. During your share, it's really important that you pause often, because the idea is that your listener is going to actually reflect back what they've heard. So that means as you share an idea or two, and then the person who's your listener is going to, in their own words, repeat what you said. And they'll do this trying to capture what you were trying to say without analyzing or adding any of their own ideas or questions and so on. Because right after that, so you'll share a bit more then, and they'll reflect back, and you'll share a bit more, and they'll reflect back for those 5 minutes. And then after, the person who was your active listener becomes the next speaker. So they pick someone else in the circle to listen to them, and they share for 5 minutes, and they get their reflections. And so we carry on like that, because we just go around in the circle. There'll be a facilitator with you that's going to keep time and take care of all those things for you. And so if you're the speaker, you pause often, you share, and you check in with what you hear your listeners say. Is that what I meant? Did they get what I meant? And if not, if you don't feel fully heard, you can make any corrections, add new information, and just check that you feel like they've understood what you wanted to communicate. And so then everyone else in the circle is a silent listener. And so they're just paying attention to the process and seeing how it unfolds. And it's really interesting to see how our attention shifts from a more active listener to a more silent listener role. And I think that's it.
Okay, yeah. Thank you, Marta. Yeah, and so if you have any questions about the process when you get into your breakout room, you can ask those to the facilitator before you get started. The facilitator will also do short introductions. Sometimes we let people introduce themselves in the big room here, but we have a lot of people, so in the interest of time, you can introduce yourselves to the people that you're in your breakout rooms with and connect with people that way. Let's see, anything else that I want to say before we go into breakout rooms? Carolina, thank you, Carolina, go ahead.
I just want to ask Edwin to respond to and to correct co-hosting and because there are mistakes in co-hosting. So please correct that, because
Which
some
is,
people will not be able and doesn't have co-hosting.
oh,
You
okay.
gave co-hosting to Dean, not to Anne. You did.
Okay.
And
Okay,
so
thanks.
other facilitators, if you ask anybody else, so they need co-hosting.
Okay,
The,
so,
yeah,
oh.
go ahead, Edwin.
Oh, so the groups, there's going to be 5 or 6 per group because the amount of people here keeps shifting. So number 1, Lou will facilitate. Number 2 is Bill. Number 3 is Carolina. Number 4 is Martha. Number 5 is Ann Jordan. And number 6 is Martin. Does that work, Martin? Just to double check so you can, Martin Reinholtz. Yeah, you're good.
I also just wanted to say a word about recording. So in your group, in your breakout room, you'll decide as a group whether you're willing to have the session recorded or not. The reason to record sessions is for education. People watch them and learn from them. Yanai mentioned that he watched actually maybe it was before we got on, that he said he'd watched a recording and learned something from it. So the education and understanding about empathy circle process are the reasons that we record circles, and you can decide in your group whether you're willing to do that or not. And I think that's it. I don't think there's anything else we need to say before we break up. Edwin or
Yeah,
any
we're
other
ready to go,
facilitators?
and we have an hour and a half for the empathic listening
Okay,
empathy
so
circle process.
yeah, so you'll be getting a message in your room a minute or so before the hour and a half is up about coming back to the main room.
Okay, so the rooms have been opened.
Good luck, everyone.
See you there.
Where you're from, and whatever relationship you have to XR, and maybe also just how you're feeling at this moment. And I'll start. I'm Lou. I'm from Northern California in the United States. I'm part of the Empathy Circle team, and I've been doing these XR empathy circles and also teaching empathy circle practice to XR folks. And I'm feeling excited. Yeah, because doing this is always energizing for me. It kind of nourishes me. So I'm excited to be doing this.
I'm Edwin Rutch from San Francisco Bay Area, part of the XR Empathy Circle work group. And I'm attentive because I'm watching, I'm kind of doing all the technical stuff here too. So that's me.
And I'm Fran, and I'm from Taunton, Somerset, and I recognise April from a previous one or two. And nice to see you, April, as well as seeing new people. And I'm, yes, it feels very comforting to come to this. I feel, I'm with family, if you like.
Thank you.
Okay, on you go, Nicole.
Thank you. I'm Nicole. I'm up in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. I'm feeling tired. I'm in the middle of moving house, and it's a big deal. And I also feel delighted just to observe the synchronicities of who's from where and what I get to do and how it all fits together. And I just feel really grateful and supported, or believe myself to be supported. So it's always nice, and I'm convinced of that. And I'm with the XR Calgary and Edmonton and Western Canada, and I am XR.
Thank you.
Hi, yep, I'm April. Yep, I'm with the Guardianship and Visioning Circle in the UK. I've been with XR since before it was XR. And I'm really tired because the heat here in Scotland, I'm in Scotland at the moment, and it's just, my Nordic blood doesn't like it. It would like to be cooler, or at least have a cool breeze. And I'm also kind of feel like we're on the home stretch. It's like there's only one more to go, and we've done all 10 principles, that I'm kind of proud of having been able to be here for everyone. So I won't say that yet, because who knows what will happen next week. But yeah, I'm really pleased to have had this opportunity to kind of dive deep into dialogue about what these principles have meant to me. And it has then informed how I've gone on with my work during the days, the week ahead. So it's great. Thank you.
Great. So just before we start, I'll just say that as facilitator, I'll be keeping time on my phone. It makes a little chime at the end of 5 minutes. So if you hear that, just, kind of wrap up what you are saying. You don't have to stop instantly, but, finish the idea that you are saying. And if you're not hearing it, because sometimes people, I'll hold up the phone like this as an indicator that time is up. The other thing I'll do is I'm just monitoring how the process is going, and I'll say something if, somebody's asking a question or doing something other than just reflecting back what they're hearing. I will say something about that, or provide some guidance around that. The other thing, there was another thing I wanted to say.
We were going to check about recording. I'm happy about that.
Yes, thank you, because I always forget. That is, I'm a bad facilitator in that area. I always forget about recording. Is everybody okay with recording? Okay, and I see that actually we're recording already. So Edwin, I guess you started that. Okay, he's covering for me. Yeah, okay, so I can't remember the other thing I was going to say, so oh, does anybody have any questions about the process before we begin? Okay, great. So has everyone participated in Empathy Circle before? Yeah, okay. So, all right, so who would like to start?
I don't mind starting.
Okay.
Yeah, I would like Nicole to listen, if that's okay. Thank you.
Pleasure.
Yeah. Yeah, we are a non-violent network, yes. I never came into this as an activist, kind of, it was all very new to me. And one of the places that I found that spoke most to me when I was kind of diving into activism was Derek Jensen. And by no means can his writing be considered, non-violent, and his speaking up for things. But where I really connected with Derek was the urgency and the passion for the destruction of what we love and what will sustain us. And the little clips that say, by any means necessary, I will stop that. And I felt that really powerfully. It was, I really recognized that rising in me when I first came to want to be an activist. I was there.
I hear you reflecting on remembering what your relationship with the writings of Derek Jensen, and in the beginning when you didn't consider yourself an activist, but you shared the passion that you see reflected in his writing for the idea that you'll do whatever it takes to get in the way of what destroys the ecosystem, the natural ecosystems.
Yeah, thank you. Fran, could I just ask that you mute, or that people who are not talking mute? Just, yeah, thank you. And so connected with that, when I came to Extinction Rebellion and became present to this principle, the non-violent principle, it was like there was a big sense of relief actually in me that I wouldn't be kind of putting my own sort of principles on the line about where I was prepared to, how far I was prepared to go in this movement, I wasn't going to be asked to do something that was going to hurt somebody else or, you know, lash back. I felt like there was more going to be asked of me than that. Yeah.
I hear you describing the relief that you felt when you encountered the principles of nonviolence that XR was going to hold, and how you felt relieved that that meant that you weren't going to be asked to do something that wasn't okay with you. And then I also heard that there was something else about that, and it's escaped me.
I think it was because I had for some years been woven in with some friends who were deep living practitioners of nonviolent communication. Sort of people who lived by the principles of nonviolent communication and all that offered in connection and vulnerability and support and support to understand that some of the ways that we have evolved to kind of hurt each other in language as well as the kind of sticks and stones of it.
Right. Oh, so I hear you remembering some your involvement with a group of friends who were committed to nonviolence, and it sounds like you learned that it goes beyond like physical acts of nonviolence and into language and communication. And I think what I missed last time was maybe that you felt relief that you weren't going to be expected to do something nonviolent, but you also felt a kind of security and safety, knowing that you'd also be held in nonviolence, so you wouldn't have that experience perpetuated on you either. Is that? I think I'm adding something there. Sorry.
Yeah, it makes me think, because I had not. Yeah, I was almost feeling enthusiastic by the challenge of finding a way to reach that non-violence that encapsulated both my passion for what is being lost and destroyed, but also my how to meet violence that I had not really experienced much of in my life up until that point. So there was going to be it was setting myself up to a challenge. Thank you.
Wow. Yeah, I hear you describing how enthusiastic you found you were able to feel, knowing that it wasn't necessarily about violence or not violence, but there might be a way where it could all be nonviolent, and maybe that it sounds like you felt excited about the possibilities of that.
Thank you, Nicole. Thank you. I feel well heard.
You're welcome. Thank you. Edwin, would you hear me, please?
Listening.
Thank you. Once again, the principle of the week just seems so relevant to everything going on in my life right now. And I feel this sadness because just reflecting on how, despite my most enthusiastic intentions, I still really grapple in that gray area between being assertive and truthful and owning that I'm allowed to like and not like things, and that if I hurt people's feelings, that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm being violent. I might just be reminding them of violence that they had perpetuated on them in the past. And what I'm doing or saying might might resemble that. And yet I have really skirted away from any kind of triggers in order to keep from being accused of violence.
So you say, once again, this topic really is relevant to your own personal life, and it's you're looking at how you deal with this topic of nonviolence, that there's sort of a gray area that you can sort of express yourself, and you want to be able to authentically express yourself. And if it has an impact on people, like, you know, what is the, you don't want to have a negative impact, but you do want to express yourself authentically as well. And so there's sort of a gray area there that you're trying to navigate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And yet, as soon as I get that accusation back at me, it's like the reacting starts for me. And I just have so much to figure out in that realm of, you know, when I've presented something and I'm confident that I have met the nonviolent standard, yet the reaction because of someone's past unresolved grief comes at me, and then suddenly I'm on my own team, and I forget to include them in my perspective taking. And I feel pleased that I've been able to then kind of go away from the conversation, reflect, and realize where I went amiss, and process the feelings that give rise to that reaction, and then come back around and tend to things. I just really want to be better at it.
So you like to get better at this nonviolent way of being, and you share something, and then people get upset about it, and they accuse you of being violent, and then you not quite sure how to deal with that. Then you sort of withdraw, and you can think about it a little bit, kind of work through, and then come back and maybe dialogue or try to address that. So this whole aspect, you're trying to just get better at it and understand it, get maybe more clarity about how to navigate that.
Yeah. And the part about what I need to do in order to be clear of that triggerability myself, because if you know, I unwittingly trigger someone and they respond violently, like that vulnerability that was being spoken of in the introduction, where I just went, I can say, ooh, okay, it looks like I really touched something in you, and like I don't even know if I'm supposed to say sorry or not, you know, like, I'm a Canadian, we apologize for everything. And I've been studying nonviolent communication, and I know the phrases, you know, like it looks like you feel hurt by what I said. Help me understand, you know. I mean, I can do it when I'm having the conversations in my head, but not always when the person's in front of me saying, you did this, you did that. And I'm like, you're right. I did kind of sort of do the thing you're saying. Don't you dare say that you kind of sort of did. Yes, I fucked up big time in my life. I'm sorry.
Yeah, so you say something, you try to be authentic. People get hurt by it for various reasons, maybe their history, whatever. Then they come back and sort of accuse you of, you know, being violent, and you're like, oh, I'm sorry, like I didn't, you know, you're Canadian. You apologize, and yeah, and so you've done the training, like nonviolent communication training, but you kind of know the stuff, but in the thick of it, it's hard to do. So you're just trying to get better at, you know, how to navigate this.
Yeah, just trying to excavate all that goopy pain out of me so that it's not what kind of becomes my behavior. I can just be free of what triggers me. Thank
Mhm.
you.
So you really like to work it out, like all the discomfort, pain, sort of all the goopy kind of stuff, and kind of sounds like have more clarity and connection
Mm,
and be able to navigate it better.
yeah, thank you so much. I feel heard. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. So Lou, can I speak to you?
Sure. Yeah, I'd be happy to listen to you.
Yeah, I love the sort of the detail of getting into those felt experiences of nonviolence. So, but before I go into those, I got something else.
Yeah, so you are very much into the felt experiences of nonviolence, and you'd like to talk about that, but there's something else you want to talk about first.
Yeah, and I had made some notes here. So April said, "Oh, I took part in all these. Sarah, very proud of myself." It continues, though. It's not over. I was thinking of having the 11th, or maybe even two principles, where people can just talk about what principle would you like to add to the list. So it's sort of an open topic to sort of keep the conversation going. So there's more.
So April's comments about being near the end of the, we're on the second to the last principle that made you want to talk about that you think there's more to do after that, and you'd like to see circles where people talk about what principles might need to be added or might be a contribution.
Excuse me. Yeah, and then on next month, the Australian team wants to create another series starting over again. So it'll be another 10 weeks. And I was thinking of sort of filling some of those days in between with maybe we could look at the demands, the 3 demands too would be a kind of a topic, like, to kind of continue. Because we've got this, there's 17 XR groups, you have it on their calendars. It'd be great to kind of continue it, to kind of keep the dialogue going. So I'm really enjoying these.
Yeah, so you're aware that the Australian XR group is going to start their own series of empathy circles around the values, and you could imagine, all the XR groups doing that, and that it could just be an ongoing conversation about values that continues. And you also think that having circles around the demands, that might be an interesting topic.
And then in terms of nonviolence, I try to think in terms of, how it relates to empathy. And I personally don't like the term nonviolence because it's a negation. It tries to be, I don't know what grammatically you call it, if there's a noun, but you're taking something, you're negating it, and then making it a thing, making the negation of something a thing. And I'd rather say, we are empathic network, right? It's like, say what you're for, not what you're against, even though the against is trying to be a thing that you're for. So it just grammatically, conceptually, I think it would be a general improvement.
Yeah, so you're interested in nonviolence and its relationship to empathy, and you think that nonviolence, you think that, sorry about that. You think that, let me silence my phone. You think that saying that we're trying to create an empathic culture or an empathic civilization is a more positive statement than saying we're trying to create a nonviolent civilization.
Yeah, because it's always kind of like, we're doing nonviolent direct action. It's kind of unclear what the action is for, though. Mm-hmm. There's a lack of clarity there. And I know Nicole was mentioning nonviolent communication. The founder was Marshall Rosenberg. He even said he didn't like the title. Somehow he got started with it. I guess he was trying to build on Gandhi's or Martin Luther King's work. And so he got started, and I've heard him talk about, like, I don't really like this title, but I'm kind of stuck with it. So.
Yeah, so, you just have a problem with the term nonviolence. You think that it is an assertion of something, a negation of something rather than something to do, it's something not to do. And you were pointing out that even Marshall Rosenberg, that you've heard him say when he was still alive, that that he didn't like the term nonviolence.
Yeah,
and
and
that he
could
was trying to build on something Gandhi had done.
Yeah, and I wonder even if the word nonviolent is violent, because it's a negation. It's saying no to this. It's like when you talk to somebody and I say no to you, it's sort of a negation. So you could even see it as sort of a little violence. Yep, sounds like my time.
So you're wondering about whether even the term nonviolence is somewhat violent because it's the negation of something rather than bringing something in. It's trying to stop something.
I feel fully heard. Thanks.
Okay. Okay, so I'll speak to Fran Hicks. Is that okay? Great. Thanks. God, this is such a rich area. And I think it's very interesting how different words have different meanings for different people, and also different, not just intellectual meanings, but actually emotional associations. I am also aware of the difficulty, because I do have a background in nonviolent communication and nonviolence, and have taught people communication and conflict resolution for a long time. I'm aware of the difficulty that people have with the term nonviolence, but I've also come to love it in a deep way. And its meaning has more acceptance and understanding these days than it has in the past.
Okay, so what I hear you saying is that you're aware what a variety of different responses there are to the different words, not only intellectually, but on a felt level. You have quite an attachment in a deep way to the term nonviolence, and you've been living with this material for a long time through conflict resolution and nonviolent communication, the Rosenberg approach.
Yeah, thanks. And it's interesting to hear you reflect that back to me, because it's also true that in almost all the teaching I do, I almost never use the term nonviolence. So I am aware of who am I speaking to, what is the language and the culture of the people that I'm speaking to, and I adjust the words that I use and how I describe things to connect with them.
Okay.
So I am, I have adjusted what I do. I am aware of who I'm speaking to and how to connect with them. And I think that's really important.
Yeah. So what I hear you saying is in all your teaching, you've learned to very much adjust your language to who you're speaking in order to have the best communication.
Yeah.
And you hardly ever use this term, as it so happens.
Yeah, I mean, it really depends on the group, because there are certain groups that love it. I think, and that kind of leads me to say that, I think the most important thing is the spirit of nonviolence. So am I open-hearted? Am I curious and seeking connection, seeking understanding in what I'm doing? If I don't have that, it does not matter what language I use. And I have heard NVC used as a cudgel, used as a weapon. And actually, that's actually one of the reasons I actually don't even use the term NVC often, because it's in many circles, it has a reputation of being like, police, the word police. I'm not, Fran, you're muted.
Yeah, muted.
Maybe one of the reasons you don't use the word nonviolent communication is because NVC has, for some people, been associated with it sort of almost being used as a cudgel, the word police, but for you, it's the motivation, actually, that's the most important thing. The willingness the wish to make a connection, to keep an open-heartedness, a curiosity. Those are the sort of the principles for you.
Yes, thank you for hearing me so well. Yeah, and there's so many different ways that happens. your eyes, your face, your body language, the things that you say, your tone, even just actions, like things with no words, like just being present with someone. So that kind of empathy and open-heartedness can be communicated in so many different ways. And the difficulty, and the thing I'm still curious about and exploring in my life is how to help people get there, to the open-heartedness. And teaching NVC is one way there, but it's, you know, how do you get people to go actually down into their heart about it, not just their head? And so, yeah, that's still something I think that's a lifelong journey of exploring that.
So you feel in a way that you're on a lifelong journey to enable people to really connect with their hearts. MVC is one way, but there are lots of other ways. And actually how we communicate isn't just how we speak, it's how we are in our bodies, our body language, just simply being there with somebody, the way we look at people, and really it's that real open-heartedness that is the goal.
Thank you for hearing me so fully. I'm done.
Right. I would like April to listen to me.
Thank you. I'm ready.
Okay. Yes. Yeah. I was thinking about this and picking up a bit on Nicole. I'm also quite familiar with MVC, and I prefer the term compassionate communication, actually. And it seems to be, to me, there's nothing more important than being able to make an empathetic connection, and so utterly needed in our world, which is inherently violent, I would say, because it works on the domination principle. You know, those in power oppressing those below them.
Thank you. I heard that you were picking up a little Nicole's and recognizing you have some engagement with NVC, you're aware of it, and that you prefer the term compassionate communication, and that leads you, that helps you kind of give it the weight of importance that you see for empathic connection, that you feel it's vital in a world that appears to you to be inherently based on the violence and oppression of each other.
Yes. Yes. And I'm very aware that I, like most human beings, need a sense of acceptance. There's very few of us who can stand confidently without feeling that we're accepted on some level, and that creates a vulnerability, it seems to me, because if I am attacked, the natural response is to defend, I mean, just in words or the way I look and so on. And it seems to me the only way I can really arm myself to keep open-hearted is to remind myself that actually I am loved, as I believe we all are. But that comes and goes.
I heard you naming the importance of acceptance for people to be able to step into their power with confidence. And I heard that you felt that when we're attacked, as is kind of inherently within the current structure, that it's natural that we lash out, that we sort of defend ourselves in ways that perhaps are not in line with that empathic principle that you see is so important. And for you, you have to kind of dig deep into the sense that you are loved. And that's what gives you the strength to connect with that compassionate communication.
Yes. And I think also, and I'm very aware that those people of great heart usually have a lightness of spirit, an ability to be humorous. And I think this comes from that deep groundedness of feeling held by something larger than themselves. And that's what I long for.
I wasn't quite clear who you were talking about as those people.
Well, I would, great souls like Gandhi and Desmond Tutu and...
Okay, yes. So those figures that you see as being those empathetic leaders, leadership in leaderful positions, you see as having had that sense of, you see them as having a sense of lightness of spirit and humorousness, but that deep down, that is facilitated by a deep groundedness and a sense of being appreciated and loved.
Yes.
And that you would long for that.
Larger than themselves, yeah. Yeah, I feel heard, thank you.
Thank you. Lou, would you care to hear me?
I'd love to do that.
Yeah, I'm really present to the way this principle is kind of agreed with by everybody in a tactical way. Yes, that will get us the feet on the ground. It will allow people who have all kinds of fears of getting into physical danger to step into action if we have this as a principle.
So I'm hearing you say that you are aware, or you're, I don't remember the exact feeling, you're aware that people are generally in with accepting the principle of nonviolence as a wise tactical move, because it makes it safe for more people to get involved, and it gets people engaged. And but then you pause there.
And however, my appreciation of the people in my life who live aspects of nonviolent communication, not just in the words, but in all the ways that they show up with each other and with the other than human life around them, constantly reaching for a type of engagement that takes us beyond what is commonly called human nature, as if human nature is something different than nature.
Yeah, so you are aware, so your experience of people in your life who practice nonviolence and or nonviolent communication in a deeper way than just tactical or practical, but that embody the spirit of it. And for you seem to be connected to something deeply human, or deeply natural, and that isn't different than nature, that is
Yes.
nature.
It's beyond
And
human.
yes, and you seem to be celebrating that. That brings you joy to connect
Yeah.
with that.
I guess, and so then there's these two. I definitely came to Extinction Rebellion with the appreciation of it as a tactical move, and deep down was always wrestling with the fact that one day I might be asked to do more than that, and I would be prepared to, because of the depth of my conviction that if something isn't done, well, actually, it's not that we're going to change anything. It's just, that something has to be done. Yeah, I'll stop that pause there.
So you were attracted to Extinction Rebellion because of this tactical position of nonviolence, because you thought that would be effective, and you thought it would help make change. But you also were attracted because of your awareness of this deeper part of nonviolence that you thought would probably someday call on you to do more. Is that right? Did I get that right?
Yeah, maybe. Actually, yeah, that's good enough. And it also, I guess so then it comes when I started looking at the toxic system, when I started to lift off the oppressions in my own head, the invisible oppressions that I didn't really know. And I start to get really present to the toxic system and how it controls us. That was when I became much more convinced that an absence of violence in all these ways is the only way to make real change in human, in the whole, in I guess a kind of, that human paradigm. Without it, we're just stepping back in and recreating the patterns of the past.
So I think what I'm understanding about what you're saying is that the more you got into Extinction Rebellion and looking at the different systems that are operating in the world and the pain that they are causing, the harm that they are causing, the more you were convinced that responding to that in anything but a nonviolent way, responding to it with any kind of violence, was just perpetuating a cycle of violence, and that the building a better world would never come from that. Is that right?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. I feel well heard.
Okay, thank you. So Nicole, can I talk to you? I'm so enjoying this conversation. It's nurturing me in the way that I was saying at the beginning, because sometimes I despair when people I know or people that I'm working with or people that I'm doing conflict resolution with, they slide so easily into their judgments of other people, their judgments of themselves, and just in that whole world of judgments, righteous indignation about what's wrong and how wrong it is, and trying to create change by telling people how wrong they are and trying to shame them into changing or threatening them into changing, by using labels, calling them this or calling them that, or and most of the time I can be fairly grounded in that and actually have empathy for them, that they're struggling with pain to try to figure out what to do. And sometimes I slip into despair. I'm never gonna, it's like the ocean is drowning me. So I'll stop there. Sorry, I said a lot.
I hear you celebrating that we're here talking about this. especially in light of your experiences with friends and family who fall into shaming and blaming and judging and getting so uptight about right and wrong and good and bad and trying to make it change that they, that it just sounds like it goes sideways, and that sometimes you even get dragged in and start to feel despair that maybe we'll never figure this out and the ocean might drown you.
Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes I just run out of empathy. Sometimes I'm challenged to have empathy for people who are just really stuck in their judgments. And the only way they can summon to communicate what they're suffering is to blame people.
Yeah, you notice that sometimes you run out of empathy in light of someone else running out of empathy and using so much blame in how they're expressing their suffering.
Yeah, and it's so helpful to say these things and have them reflected back. Another thing that comes up for me when you say that back to me is I also often feel like an alien, because when I have an empathic response to somebody who's done something awful, I mean, they've hurt somebody or they've behaved in a way that's terrible, and I can have some empathy for what they're trying to do. I'm scared to death to like speak it, or I feel like a freak because everyone else is so convinced that they're just so evil and they need to be gotten rid of. And I'm thinking, so what is your model for change? Like, your model for change is to get rid of all these people that have these other ways of looking at stuff and are trying to are doing things I disagree with. Yeah, we need to connect with them and try to understand them and help them see the harm of what they're doing. But like, what's your alternative to doing that? It's just to get rid of them somehow. So stop there.
Yeah, I hear you expressing your gratitude to have this space to really look at these things and be heard, especially in light of how sometimes you feel like an alien, that you even can conjure up any empathy for somebody who's not empathetic, and yet you sometimes sounds like you feel like you can't really you're scared to admit it or talk about the empathy you have, because the people around you might be so appalled by what the people you have empathy for have done, that and they want to just get rid of people like that. But then your question, it sounds like, becomes, well, how is that different and how does that make actual change?
Thank you. Yes, thanks for hearing that. Actually, my time's up. So thank you. I really appreciate being heard for that.
Thank you. You're welcome. Fran, will you hear me, please? Thank you. Yeah, I'm really enjoying the sense of having space to have whatever thoughts and ideas and feelings I might have. And I see that as a result of this empathetic listening, like, agreement that we're all going by here today. And it's what keeps me coming back on these events.
So you're really appreciating the space that this forum allows you to be with your thoughts and feelings, and it brings you back. It's brought you back again because it feels so nurturing and holding.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm like viscerally noticing that as I listen to you kind of almost remind me who I am by reflecting what you're hearing from me, that there's a visceral sense of spaciousness that is so delicious. And it starts to give me the sense that the love that I'm looking for in my life is right here. If it just gets room, it'll be here.
So being listened to, as we do in this space, gives you a real visceral feeling of the love that is in you, and that's a wonderful sense of release and freedom. Was I right?
Yeah, it's so real, and it kind of turns something around for me. It makes it possible for me to have like a lived experience of being love without having to prove I'm lovable.
Mm. So I hear you saying it really sort of turns things around for you and gives you an experience of feeling that you are love without having to prove it. It's just...
Yeah, and yet it's kind of a paradox, because what makes it possible for me to have that experience in the first place is being listened to and trusted and allowed by others the space to have that love expand from inside me out to meet that container.
Okay. Though in a sense this is paradoxical, because you're aware that that freedom and that space to allow you to experience that comes from the empathetic listening that you're experiencing in the group.
And it gave me this idea. It occurred to me to wonder if I can maintain that almost as a belief that I do have space, even when it's not being granted to me by the people around me. What if I could live as if I do have that space?
And it's given you a sort of blown away feeling that if you could hang on to that belief, what if you could believe that you have that space even when you're not in this forum? Wow, what could that mean?
Sounds like an experiment to do. Yeah, and it almost becomes like a sense of that there are muscles in the air around me, that if I can just keep them alive, that can be my lived reality.
Okay, it almost feels like there are sort of muscles in the air. If you could keep that, it could be your new reality, that feeling.
Yeah, I'm gonna see what I can do with that. Thank you. I feel heard and and more.
It's a pleasure. All right. Okay. Edwin, would you listen to me?
Listening.
Oh, yes. This is it's such a privilege. There are few spaces where this depth of exchange can happen, and it gives me hope. Yeah, when that can be quite rebuffed with the sort of news we hear all the time.
So you feel a sense of privilege that we can be here, listen to each other, and that this actually gives you a sense of hope with all the sort of negative news that you tend to hear.
Yes. the challenge for me, I think, is to, I'll take this out of this session, I think, is to, is how to communicate how essential this is for all that we do in XR. For instance, at our next local meeting, I am running the more regenerative section, and before people talk about what actions they can do, and I have, when we were meeting in person, I did introduce listening circles as a start to our meeting, and it was really well received. And then when we went online, I introduced it again, and I think it was when this whole crisis was beginning to unfold, and there were few people there, and it didn't go so well. I don't know where, and I would love to bring it back and remind people how important, but I get, I lose my confidence.
Mm-hmm. So you really see the value of what we're doing with this listening, and you've been trying to bring it into your local XR group. But it's there's a challenge there. It's a struggle, like how to really get this. And some various struggles have come up, and to get acceptance, you start losing your confidence about the steps to take.
Yes. But and I am aware too how I tend to anticipate. I do anticipate judgment, and I need to challenge that in myself, because I start off in a defensive way in my head, which is not helpful.
Mm-hmm. So you're just sort of observing, like, how am I? And I see people I anticipate people are going to be judgmental of this. So you bringing that energy into the thing, into this relationship already, and it's kind of affecting maybe how the relationship works.
Yeah, so it's good. And sometimes I manage to challenge that in time and remind myself, of the good-heartedness of most of the people in our group. And I just, and that we're here to learn, and any mistakes can be, I will say, can be composted for new growth. And I need to remind myself of that.
Yeah, so you're trying to find a way of dealing with that anticipation of negative judgment. And so you're thinking, oh, well, it's a nice group here. Even if I fail, I can, take those learnings and kind of go forward and kind of compost those failures, potential failures. Mm-hmm. Something new can grow out of that learning.
And keep a sense of humor, I think, is what I need to do. And I'm not so good at that.
So you really like to improve your sense of humor, because you're kind of judging yourself that you're not good at it.
Well, yeah. Yes, thank you. I feel heard.
You feel fully heard? Okay. Then I'll speak to April. Okay, so what was coming up for me was thinking of, Nicole was talking about, I share some things with someone, they get upset about it, and then they lash back, and this whole dynamic, right? The relationship gets all kind of muddled, and there's judgment, and it's a big painful mess, and how to negotiate that. So I'm just thinking about that dynamic.
You're remembering something that Nicole talked about when she was laying out the dynamics of speaking up and feeling the judgment come back from people, and how that affects us.
And it was tying into something I've been thinking about with individuality and mutuality. So we can say, I'm going to be individually nonviolent, I'm going to be individually empathic. but what about the mutuality of it, right? That it's really a relationship we're in. And how about let's set the ground rules for the energy that we want for our relationship, a mutual relationship. So been just thinking about that.
So that helps lead you into the separating the difference between the individual commitment to nonviolence and the mutual shared responsibility for stepping into that relationship together.
Yeah, and it's like here we have an agreement, right? We all say we're going to use empathic listening. So we've come in, and that's that's the space that's sort of created, and it has we all appreciate that space and that energy. But there is an agreement that we have, and so that one, it's a mutuality, and the second is we got this agreement. So that's just sort of a dynamic that kind of want to explore.
I think I hear an appreciation that the agreement is part of the holding basket for making it a mutual agreement for everyone here. The agreement that we're stepping into an empathic dialogue.
And that's kind of what I see in terms of nonviolence as a tactic, because I'm seeing all this stuff, with XR is, okay, we're going to be nonviolent. We're just going to go out there. We're going to blame and shame the system. We're going to blame and shame the government and the companies and whatever. And then we're going to get some publicity, and then, it's going to get out in society, and there'll be sort of social pressure put on those powers that be. And that's sort of one path. The other path is what I would say is Kingian nonviolence. Like Martin Luther King had a specific process for nonviolence, which was first, with the powers that be, go invite them to a dialogue, right? And then if they won't come to the table with just the invitation, then all the nonviolent steps are done and it ends with bringing them to the table. So that's sort of the dynamics that I see.
I heard a separation here from in what you see as the tactics of Extinction Rebellion, in kind of calling down the shame and judgment on the system, trying not to, but also the government, those in making the decision-making power, and just coming out in mass, doing what you can to make a stir, to cause a disruption, getting the attention, and therefore rolling it out bigger, creating more people. And that's one route. And then the other route would begin with the invitation into an agreement where you're discussing these topics.
And then they probably will not want to talk, right? It's the powers that be. Hey, we don't need to talk to you because we have the power. But then the whole thing is to bring them to the table. And it's sort of a broad generalization. It's not totally what's happening in XR, but it is just a generalization.
So that the tactics of that come after the invitation to the table that's then refused are then designed to bring them to the table.
And the thing I think with Kingian nonviolence that was missing was come to the table, but it's like, how do you set the table, right? How is the table set before or after? And I think that the thing to do is set the table with empathy circles, right? So the demand is to demand that the powers that be come into an empathy circle. And I think that's sort of a missing, or it's an ingredient that I think could really improve the whole strategy.
Yeah, so I hear that you see that where the table laid in the agreements held, the basket that's held with the Empathy Cafe, that would create a reassuring space that may help the process of meeting at the table and coming to agreements.
I feel fully heard, thank you. I think that was my time too, right? Okay.
I will ask Fran to listen, if you don't mind. there's something about empathy that makes people shy away from it. And that is because it, you know, it takes us to that edge of vulnerability where we might cry. Goodness me, if we started crying, we might never stop. There's enough grief when you get past the grievances to cry an ocean of sorrowful filled tears.
Yes. So I hear you say that maybe the resistance to empathy is that actually when you really get into that place, it really touches very deep down and can release tears of grief because of what we're talking about. Yeah.
And let's get really present to what we're talking about. Because when you get present to the real truth of what is unfolding in the science, to the 58 degrees in the Arctic this week, you know, we are not talking about future generations living through catastrophe. You know, we are going to see devastating changes in the way we are able to live unfold first, of course, already happening in the global south and oh, I don't need to tell all this. Yeah, I'll stop there.
Yeah. Yes. Yes, it brings you to that deep place of sadness, reminding you about 58 degrees in the Arctic and knowing that it's happening now, it's not happening in the future, and it's happening in a devastating way in the global south. It's reality.
So I think my connection with that and empathy is that I have the great experience of learning about empathy with some really pretty incredible people who have demonstrated it, not least of which is Edwin and these cafes and all the people I've been wound in, Nikki Kashtan and her ever, you know, great generosity in leading workshops with Extinction Rebellion rebels, going into facilitation and going, you know, really bringing problems and helping us problem solve at the kind of minutiae level. And an IIT, an international convention with Robert Gonzalez, and I heard him describe and go into his practice of empathy that opened a light bulb for me, and I realized something about empathy. I'll let you reflect that before I carry on.
You feel hugely privileged at being introduced to wonderful facilitators like Nikki Kashtan and I think it was Robert Gonzalez, the latter who Nikki, who takes you into in problem solving into the minutiae of the situation, and Robert Gonzalez, who for you sort of clicked a light bulb that was really significant about the crucial element of empathy in what we're doing.
And so for me, that was that both the physical sensation and the description and the practice that Robert explained and gave you a kind of a route into was exactly the same physical sensations and open, deep kind of loving openness that I felt when I communicated with trees through sound.
Okay, so the physical description and that Robert brought to you actually gave you the sensation, that sensation that you'd had with your connection to trees. That, yeah.
And one last sentence on that is that I believe that empathy is not just human to human.
Right.
I believe that empathy is the way we can connect with the other than and more than human world.
Okay.
Thank you.
And what that, the real significance for you of this was that it confirmed a feeling that you had, that empathy is more than human to human. It is that fundamental connection between life forms. So,
Thank you, Fran. That was well heard. Thank you.
Thank you, April. Oh, I don't think I feel I have anything more to say. So I'll hand it on to whoever would like to carry on.
So I'll reflect that back. So, Fran, it seemed like you were just really reveling in what's been said and connecting with it, and you don't have anything more to say at this moment. Is that right? Okay, thanks. So let's see. Nicole, would you listen to me?
Yes, you're listening.
So I have a couple things I made notes about. Let's see. So one is about fierceness. So fierceness is a quality that I think is important not to lose. And I think one of the things that happens with people who are, very into empathy or nonviolent communication, that it's, or one of the things that makes it maybe non-attractive to some people is that they think it's all squishy and good feelings and, all about love, and that there's no place for fierceness or no place for strength. And I think so, and I do think of myself as an empathic, compassionate man, and I am also fierce, and I am also capable of strength. I'm a strong person. And so those two things don't seem like a contradiction to me. And yes, I'll stop there.
So you'd written some things down, and one of them was about fierceness. And sounds like you're acknowledging that for you as a man, you have empathy and softness, and you also have strength and the ability to be fierce, and that you don't see those as like irreconcilable. And it sounds like you're looking at that with the acknowledgement that there are people who believe that strength and fierceness aren't like empathy. They're not. And you notice that sometimes people have a sense that there's like this kind of maybe a wishy-washy, lovey-dovey thing that can't include strength and fierceness.
Thank you, yes. And I realize, so when I think of myself, so when am I fierce? It's like the fierceness that I'm capable of allows me to stand steady when I am confronted with something very powerful and strong. So a couple of people actually in the circle talked about, facing anger. Somebody is very angry and judgmental or in a huge amount of pain, and that pain is coming out in a way that we would call an attack. And being able to stand strong in my compassion for myself and my groundedness, and being able to listen to it and recognize that it's not about me or that I'm stimulating what's going on, and the person is expressing their pain and their whatever. But that I don't have to accept their judgments of me or listen to their judgments or recognize that it's about me. I may have stimulated it, but it's not about me, and that I can hear the pain in them. So that's one of the ways that I think of being fierce and strong.
So I hear you describing one of the ways that you kind of maybe practice being fierce and strong is by kind of standing when somebody is coming at you with intensity, and reminding yourself or recognizing that even though you might have triggered them, that really it's not about you, and that you can stand strong and firm and maybe even intense too, and like let them have their expression without like maybe going soft and mushy and backing down like maybe people think love should be.
Yes, thank you. And I'd say the other way that's coming up for me that is fierce is hanging on to my values and my principles when I'm feeling dragged into when I feel the pull of being dragged into being judgmental or being, joining in with attacking others. And just trying to hold on to my values and expressing them actually without attacking others. So that's not an easy thing to do. So that's another place I think that happens to me.
So I hear you describing how another place where you are strong is when you kind of end up feeling dragged into kind of relinquishing your values or not mentioning them, but instead you express them and you hold on to them and be strong that way.
Yeah, and I think this is my last thing. And I think one of the primary ways I do that is recognizing what voices in me are speaking. So it's very easy to have a critical voice come up telling me I'm screwing up, I'm failing, I'm no good, I don't know what I'm doing. That critic is very, but then there's another part of me, like a nurturing part, which, so Rosenberg would call this self-empathy, who recognizes who I am and what I'm capable of and reminds me of to accept myself and that I am imperfect and that's okay, and self-acceptance, and that when I can remember to listen to that voice and strengthen that voice and activate that voice, that helps me stay steady. So I'll stop there.
I hear you describing these two parts of yourself. One that is maybe criticizing you and judging you and being hard on you for whatever you might have done that isn't perfect, and then this other part that can give you empathy and kind of make that an internal conversation where empathy prevails and holds you to your values.
Supports me.
Supports you.
Yeah. Thank you. Yes, I feel heard. Thanks.
You're welcome. Thank you. April, will you hear me? Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Nicole.
I feel so grateful to be reminded in so many different ways, from so many different perspectives, that empathy and strength kind of really are my values.
Mm. I hear an appreciation for the practice in the cafe, reminding you of the importance, the significance of empathy in your life, as that they are at the root of your values. Mm.
It reminds me of a photo I have on my phone that has been there for a long time. It says, "Love fiercely, because this all ends." And how that has been a mantra that I've kept with me, both to remind me that my own mortal life in this body allegedly will end, and that material life, and there are these different lengths of lifespans of things, and that even as I work really diligently to accept the grief that comes with loss and death, that itself becomes so alivening, that as I gain more kind of familiarity with that truth, that I begin to be able to include more openly that death, in a strange way, is life.
Mm. I heard you begin this with the quote, "Love fiercely, because this all ends," and how that you've kept that with you and helping you engage with the building resilience as you go through life's losses and the sadnesses, the brokenheartedness bits of life. But I heard that as you engaged with that more fully, that also kind of brought on a new connection or engagement with it as you began to become present to the fact that death actually is life. It feeds life.
And again, I just get this like excitement really around this possibility that I might expand into a more kind of self-sufficient spaciousness and experience of myself as a source of love that doesn't need to rely on mainly people around me occurring to me as blocks to that with the strength and the ferocity and the holding to my values and the spaciousness that I learn by coming to empathy cafes and by engaging empathetically with others, that I could really like live as this in a more consistent way.
I heard you reaching towards an appreciation, I guess, of these elements, the fierceness, the principles, the spaciousness, the expansiveness that brings. That could help you reevaluate maybe the relationships within life as less as oppositional, but in that empathetic space, using practices such as this to expand into a more loving expression of yourself.
I even had another level listening to your reflection of appreciating how even if you got it wrong, that there would be a rightness to it because it would motivate a clarity on my part. And I feel so heard.
So I'm hearing that, you know, even if I'm reflecting wrongly, it adds another level of clarity into your thinking, so nothing can be wrong.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Wow.
Edwin, would you listen? Thank you.
Listening.
There's always so much I want to say in these, and especially in response to people, I'm always, so much comes up in what people say, and I wish there were the never-ending time to just let it unfold and unfold and unfold.
Yeah, you're always running out of time because new things are coming up and new things are coming up, and you just like to be ongoing, having this space where you just can unfold and unfold.
Thank you. And what I remember after each cafe is the kind of little kicking myself later for not focusing on the principle and value as it arises in Extinction Rebellion. And I would like, there's something like really on my mind about this at the moment, because Yanai and me are on this, are in, you know, guardianship and visioning. Guardianship and visioning sees a lot of the documents that come through before they start to get published out, you know, and language is a significant part of, I mean, it's how we, you know, turn sound, vibrations, sacred sound into spells. We put them together into words that people have a level of meaning for them, and then that kind of fixes something. Sacred sound gets fixed into meaning.
So after these cafes, you sort of kick yourself a little bit for having not maybe focused on the value or the principle itself, kind of gone maybe deeper into those. And that you do, in terms of, you know, being a guardian of these principles, you see a lot of the documents, and there's really the importance of translating sort of the energy and the into vocabulary that's sort of magical, like a spell, and so that there's that aspect.
And of course, documents that are written with great urgency, and the urgency of these times that we've just talked about regularly hold a violence in the language that doesn't pass through my very large filters for nonviolence. You know, the structure, the inherent kind of blaming, shaming, and the violence in the language, just really hard to address without seeming nitpicky.
So these principles get put out there, and you sort of sense the vocabulary and the energy of them, and they don't really fit with the nonviolent energy that you would like to put out there. And so there's sort of an incongruent, and maybe feeling some frustration about that.
Yeah, and the frustration is that holding is like holding that what comes across to other people as being nitpicky about words. It, you know, has a much greater, deeper level to it. You know, it's all about how we say things that are not going to put people down and squash them and make them feel as people small, and not the actions that we're condemning, or the you know, having an understanding. I understand where this language comes from, and my regret, my sadness that it just comes up over and over again, and the people's frustration as I keep chipping away at it. Yeah, it's difficult.
Yeah, so your experience is that with the vocabulary has maybe sort of a domination or old culture sort of aspect to it, and you're trying to, you know, change it to a new vocabulary that's maybe more nonviolent or more empathic, and then people see you as nitpicking, like, oh, you're just nitpicking about this, and so maybe some frustration about not, you know, just being judged as being nitpicking, but you're really just wanting to create the vocabulary that's kind of embodies the new nonviolent way.
Yeah, was that my time? I was thinking, but yeah, yeah. So I guess it's that, you know, how to stay engaged with that kind of process. You know, a year and a half of it, and being, you know, and the pushback against. Thank you. The pushback against it makes me feel like an unwanted voice. You know, I don't. You know, that the team is not appreciated for what it does. That it's not wanted to be doing this nitpicky stuff. There's urgent stuff to do, you know, and it's like, for me and others in my team, it's like, this is so crucially important, especially after time. We should be learning now.
So you really see the importance of what you're doing with these principles, and being clear on what they mean, and bringing in the energy, sort of a nonviolent energy, and that others are just, and you don't feel heard. You're kind of like judged, dismissed, like you're nitpicky, and don't really feel like you're being heard, because others are saying, no, we got to go take action, and, you know, let's kind of ignore what April and the group is saying, sort of.
Yeah, thank you, Edwin. I feel heard.
Okay, so we just have 2 minutes. So I don't know if you want to do anything with those 2 minutes. Lou?
I just want to say I relate so strongly to what April was just talking about. I find myself in the exact same place where I'm changing words, and like people get ignored. It's ignored, like it doesn't get incorporated in the next draft. And then I say, well, wait, you know, and then I ask others in the group, well, what do you think? I don't care. I mean, it doesn't matter say it one way or another. It doesn't really, it's nitpicking. It drives me nuts.
And so for me, that's where the shift, for, you know, in seeing the strategic uses of nonviolence. But if we're really embracing it for a paradigm shift, for something far more than just having the government change, then it's got to be embedded. It's about understanding why we're doing it, not just using it as a tactic to get more people. So yeah,
I'm with you.
Keep going.
And I think this empathic listening that we're doing is sort of that essence too, right? It's like that's why I keep trying to bring it into XR, you know, and actually into the actions as well. So 30 seconds, we're back into the full group.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, I love talking with all of you. It was great.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
See you in the group.
Well, welcome back, everyone. It's great to see everyone's faces. I'm so moved by this technology that allows us to connect from all over the place and split up into rooms and come back into the main room. It's amazing. So now we want to just do a debrief, people sharing your feelings, thoughts, experiences, what you're taking away from your circles, any highlights for you. You can take about a minute or up to a minute. And I guess I'll time that. And if you don't hear the timer go off, I'll just hold up my phone, or I'll say something if you're going way over. So, and I think for efficiency and time, I will call on people, because if we just wait, we'll lose a lot of time. So, Anne, you want to go first?
Okay. Well, that was an interesting circle. It had a little bit of challenges. It had some challenges in it, but I enjoyed it and I found it valuable. And I think I've got a lot more to do exploring nonviolence especially under Yanai's suggestion of the inward looking part of it. And it was good to hear other people's thoughts and comments. And I pass to, should I pass?
Sure.
Fran.
Well, I really appreciated our circle. There was very deep sharing, which is not surprising because empathy is so crucial to everything we do and to the vision of the world we want. And I think that was really felt by everybody.
Fran, would you pick someone else?
Yep. Hester.
Thank you, Fran. Yeah, thank you to everyone in my circle. It was quite a varied discussion. We spoke about some of the DNA of nonviolence and activism. We spoke about the violence in activism right now, which could be seen as appropriate response to the death of an innocent man in police custody. How to stand in solidarity with movements that are fighting for the right to live, for the right to be safe when you walk down the street, and yeah, how to do that and what that brings up for us. And I also spoke to the experience of being a mother and trying to use this value of nonviolence daily, you know, even though I may not have been parented in that way. Like, one of my things was, you know, I have to say this stops here, it stops with me, and how to raise children that are resilient for all the challenges of the future, including no blame and shame, including nonviolence, including, you know, all of our principles that we hold so dear, and we aspire to them. It doesn't mean that we are that we may not be meeting up to these aspirations, but we aspire to them, and we're the first people to say this is going to be a better future if we have these principles.
Thank you, Hester. You want to pass to someone else?
Yeah, I'll pass to Anne Paul.
Nice to see you. And hear your children. Our little group was wonderful. It had a major flaw in it, or issue, in that one of our participants wasn't able to take part because of her bandwidth. And so one of the points that I was very conscious of in our conversation is that violence and nonviolence appear in many ways, and state violence that doesn't make it possible for all of us to communicate digitally right now, or corporate violence, is another kind of violence. I mean, right now that's the only way we have of talking to each other, really, that's safe. So and it's very much an issue in rural and northern Canada, and for poor people. Either they lack the equipment. So I'm not even going to try to sum up what we talked about. We talked about so many things, and it was a great conversation. And I really enjoyed, you know, sharing points of view with the participants in our group.
Thank you, Anne. Could you pass to someone else?
Yeah. Let's see. I will pass to Dean, if that's okay with you, Dean.
Thank you, Anne. We were very intense. In fact, we almost said we needed another 6 or 7 weeks just on this one thing, because the depths that are involved in non-violence and overcoming the projection of other people's violence upon our non-violence, and claiming that we're being violent when we're not actually being violent, is part of the systems approach that are used to make us self-police ourselves, so that we become inactive rather than actually becoming an active member of a community. There was a lot of expression about violence done upon ourselves, and quite a few of us were stating about the fact that violence had been committed to us, And the thing that drew us to XR was the fact that XR was very adamant about the fact that it was a non-violent direct action network. And this was something totally new to some of us. But as we became more entrenched within the XR system, we realized actually it's not a new approach. It's just something that's new to us. And it's part of our decolonialization of our Western mindset that we are not necessarily the be all and end all that we thought we were. And actually we've got a lot of work to do to get back to what some of the other people are trying to tell us what we should be doing. So there's a lot more work to be done, but it's a very interesting subject. And sometimes we have to be honest with our violence. So I'd like to pass it on to Nita. Thank you.
Thanks, Dean. So you're passing it on to who?
To Tanya. So.
Hello, thank you, Dean. We had a very analytical sort of group. We were examining the tension between our own anger and our commitment to nonviolence and how those two live in the same body. And we discussed our profound solidarity with the writers and examined, like, didn't really come to answers, but like examined how do we show solidarity with them as individuals and also like as Extinction Rebellion, a nonviolent movement, because we don't condone but we don't condemn, right? So, but also, and I love that this came up, that we come from a position of privilege when we talk about this, right? When we talk about nonviolence, like I have white passing privilege. There's lots of privileges that we share that people who are writing right now don't have, because we don't face immediate immolation from the state if we act up, and we don't have the shared pain and anguish and history of 400 years of chattel slavery and having your children taken away from you, and you know, it's just unimaginable, right? So you can't judge, and while violence is not something that we choose, is there a way to express solidarity? Because many of us, well, I will speak for myself, like if not for some physical issues that I were having, like I live in the New York City metro area and I would be out there protesting with them, and then we also examined, as somebody in Extinction Rebellion, I would not be violent, but is that even appropriate to be at a protest where people are probably going to be, you know? So yeah, time. I will pass to April Grief Song. Did you go yet? If you'd like to.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah. Oh, again, I'm deeply moved by these conversations and the possibilities that empathy opens up in a shared, a shared sense of possibilities greater than I can imagine alone. And alongside-edness there. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, April.
Lots going on. Thank you. I'll pass on to AC.
Hey, thanks, April. And thanks to everyone here, because these are just so amazing. And I just got to show respects to everyone that's participating. We had a really interesting discussion. I just want to highlight maybe two things. One thing that stood out to me was this question of, yes, we're like maybe fundamentally a group that's fighting for like climate justice, but the parallel and something that's maybe intertwined, entangled with it, is how much we need to advocate for social justice at the same time, acknowledging our privilege, speaking out against institutional violence, oppression, and so forth. So that was one thing that's kind of sticking with me. And then the other thing was something that one of our group members shared, insofar as towards the root of violent interactions being this sense of miscommunication, this sense of not being heard. And that really resonated with me on a personal level. You know, the arguments that really get ugly are the ones where neither side is like, you're not listening, or both sides are like, you're not listening to me. So, you know, I mean, again, personally, I find this an amazing way to practice really being able to listen in real time. And I'm grateful for that. So thank you all.
Thank you, AC.
Thanks.
Who would you like to pass to?
Who hasn't gone yet? Next on my screen is Danielle.
Somehow I knew you were going to call on me. All right. So from our group, I just reflected on kind of one of the last points, that this is a really complicated topic, that there's not a lot of places where we can untangle, you know, the emotions and complexity of what, you know, came up in our group. And that would be good to continue the conversation and acknowledge that. And I also wanted to just tack on for myself that, you know, for me, violence is any time that I create sort of separation or create kind of an other, and that could be kind of in my personal relationships or, you know, even in my household, and so just being aware of that. And then with the tensions, you know, this past week in the US, I listened to a great talk with someone from XR, Ronan Harrington and Charles Eisenstein. And I can drop that link in the chat. But one of the topics that came up in there was, you know, escape or activism as a form of escapism. So I want to kind of take a look at that in relationship to violence for myself. And this idea of like the unintegrated shadow side of the activist was a phrase that was used there that really piqued my curiosity and inspired and motivated me to want to dig deeper into this topic before I speak or act further on, you know, so many of the ways that I can. So if it's okay, I'll drop that in the link. And if anyone hasn't seen it or is unfamiliar, you know, they can check it out. But I'm very grateful today to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Danielle. You want to pass it to someone?
Marta.
Thank you, Danielle. We speak of privilege, and, you know, as it was mentioned in the context of nonviolence. For me personally, I feel like we're Jedis in training. That's the ambition. We'll be messy, but then if we don't do it, there's no hope. So yeah, and there's this thing. Brené Brown says it a lot, but I don't know if it's hers or if it's some. But it's strong back, soft front, and I don't know. I like that. Strong back, soft front, and wild heart. I think it embodies what I understand nonviolence as. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Marta. Who would you like to pass to?
I'll pass on to Caro.
Hi, everyone. We had a lot of different things, but to say in 1 minute, I would say that we were discussing love and rage, the signing Extinction Rebellion activists use to sign their messages. And I said that I don't like it. I prefer to say love and truth, because that embodies truly Gandhian satyagraha, clinging to the truth with love in action. That's truly nonviolence for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Caro. Who would you like to pass to?
I will pass to Domi.
I felt it. Okay. So at first, maybe I will say that I was really scared about being here with different people I don't know, and especially because English is not my first language. But when I start to hear what and how people talk about their feelings and they sharing their thoughts about how they feel, I felt really connected, and that also was one of the topic we shared, was the feeling of being connected, because feeling anger is not bad. You can meet different people who are angry about the same things you are angry, and you just feel very connected. So it was like this topic and this feeling, and I'm very thankful for this meeting. So I will pass now to Katie.
Thanks, Domi.
Hi, thank you. There was so much we talked about. I don't quite know what to say really, but I'll just say the one thing that stuck with me right at the end was something that Maureen said about the simplicity of acting within your local community in a non-violent way through sharing and simple things like growing food, because it's such a huge concept, non-violence. It's very covert in places, and I just liked that. It stuck with me. It's something you can do, which is important. So thank you to my group. I had a lovely time. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie. Who would you like to pass to?
I'll pass to Marguerite, please.
Yes, we unfortunately we lost a couple of people on our circle, and I was wanting to learn more about Africa, but Euro, I think his connection wasn't very good, and he had to leave. But yes, I agree. All the people that have English isn't their first language. I think it's amazing. I'm always impressed. But and I suppose I'm taking away that inner, looking at what inner non-violence is. I don't think yeah, I think that's something I need to think about. And I'll pass to Bill.
Thank you, Marguerite.
Well, first I want to express we had a really, I think, intense, profound conversation. I learned a lot. And what came away from me is the proactive healing power of listening in order to create the kind of preconditions we need to create a different type of culture. So again, I really appreciated that. And let's see, I will pass to James.
Thank you, Bill.
Yeah, I agree and resonate with a lot of what I heard, that our group was really quite, it was intense and very satisfying. I was very impressed by the extent, willingness of each of us in my group to really own how violence lives in us, and we are, rather than it's these violent people out there that we're creating the seeds of violence in our own lack of understanding or capacity. So I was very satisfied, and there was a lot more to do and explore as well. So yeah, so thank you.
Thank you, James. Who would you like to pass to?
Oh, gosh. Douglas, did you speak yet?
I suppose my takeaway is actually you could have 10 sessions on this and still feel like you're in the starting blocks. It's such a many-layered, almost multi-dimensional. It's just so many different ways of connecting and questions to ask. So a lot to digest.
Thank you, Douglas. Who would you like?
Karen? Is Karen Bean?
I think she, no, go ahead.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, I was feeling very tired today because we got an action, and but I really enjoyed this empathy circle because we got some little troubles, but Anne acted at the good situation in hand, so it was okay. And at the end, it was really comfortable because we are only 3. And we will talk a lot about the non-violence in actions, of course, because we are a non-violent movement. This is part of our DNA. And I think using meditation can help to canalize the anger we are feeling inside. And anyway, this is the image we have around the world. We are a non-violent movement, yes. And using empathy circles as well can help to create some better connections between people. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Who would you like to pass to?
I don't know, sorry.
Who? Everyone who hasn't spoken yet.
Sally, I don't know.
Hi. Well, you know, I was kind of in the rage mode and you know, thinking how to resolve it, and then Carolina, you know, kind of said, you know, it's truth, and so you can whittle down rage into truth. And I guess if you're dealing with an oppressed, you know, the Black Lives Matter group being the oppression for the last 400 years, that, you know, you deal with the truth of the oppression. And then there's, you know, just from a child to an adult, you know, when you're a mom, dealing with kids and seeing the patterns start at a very young age of, you know, the one kid hitting the others, and how to deal with that. It's very complicated.
Thank you, Sally. Who would you like to pass to?
I don't see that, so if you could do it, that would be fine.
Sure. If you haven't spoken, could you raise your hand?
There's Mew in Amsterdam.
Martin?
Yeah, that's me. MJ.
Okay, go ahead, MJ.
Yeah, we also had some good conversations, and I think it could go on for a lot longer. Just one thing I'd like to note, there's it's about Erica Chenoweth and her science, which is kind of behind the principle, why XR chose it, that she realized 66% of nonviolent movements in the past have been successful, which is twice as much as violent movements. So there is a good grounding for that as well. I will pass it to Maureen.
Yes, I was struck by there was quite a bit of discussion in our group about how sensitive is Extinction Rebellion when it does actions in communities. How aware are the people, how aware are the activists of the oppressed nature of some of the communities where actions are being done? So there's therefore the need to grow in sensitivity around how members are oppressive and how can be so focused on the goal that we can miss and create chaos along the way. Now we need to create chaos, and then we're always aware of the other principle about just transition. So we are always trying to balance between the goal we are trying to achieve, which is a better world for everybody, and oppressed, how we might ourselves become oppressors. There was quite a lot of discussion around that, and there's a lot of thinking to be done, it seems, by Extinction Rebellion as a movement, and reflection on how it has been active in the last year. Thank you. Thanks to everybody in my group.
Thank you, Maureen.
I hand over to the facilitator to choose.
Okay, Martin, I think you had your hand up before.
Yeah, I can go. I don't know if there's anybody left. Okay. Yeah, it was a very interesting group. Very good discussion, starting from the small things and then moving to XR and kind of ending up in how the small things, they do change a lot by just taking a small step. And there is a lot of thoughts that came up. So it's like I've been diving really deep. And I'm coming up to the surface, and all these little oxygen bubbles in my bloodstreams are popping in my head. So that was a very there's a lot to think about, and definitely a long discussion to be had on this. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, Martin. Is there anyone else that hasn't had a chance to speak yet? Edwin, yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, it was, for me, it was kind of what is that nonviolence is the magic ingredient, or the active ingredients is empathy. So we talked a lot about sort of the relationship of empathy and nonviolence, sort of the blocks, which is trying to dominate, fear of feelings, fear of being seen as weak, sort of the benefits of being heard, and so the spaciousness that's created, and I think there was the love that can sort of flow out of that. So yeah, those were just a few. There was so many different kind of aspects that came up. That you got to watch the video recording. It's recorded. And also putting in the links to the next, for the on arrival document. You can see if you can add your name and contact info in there too. And there's some links for sort of next steps too, which are facilitator training, and yeah, you can see how to become an empathy circle facilitator. That's it.
Thank you. Thanks, Edwin. Hold on just a minute, Caro. Is there anyone else that hasn't shared? Okay. And I haven't, so I'm going to do that for a second. But go ahead, Caro. What did you want to say?
I just want to say that on our Empathy Circle Facebook group, you can find events, all events we do, and the next Empathy Cafe is on Monday at 8 a.m. UTC. You can find also time converters, so you can find your own time. So 8 a.m. UTC on Monday, Empathy Cafe about workshop region one-on-one, quite famous workshop one-on-one. You can participate. Leona will be main host.
Okay, thank you for all that information. So I'll just share. So I was really moved in our group, felt very connected to the folks in that group, and so a couple of things happened for me. One is what I often experience in empathy circles, which is feeling cared for by being listened to deeply, and how nurturing that feels, how nourishing it is to be heard that way. So that was one. Then the second for me was about fierceness and empathy, or fierceness and nonviolence. So that both are needed, both are, so those are not incompatible with each other. And that it actually relate very strongly to what Marta said, which is a saying that I hadn't heard before: soft in the front, strong in the back. So that's holding love and fierceness at the same time. Fierceness meaning just a strength of standing up for what I think is important, but doing it with love. And wild heart, that's great. I love that. So I just want to say thank you to everyone for participating today. And I think that's it. I mean, there were things at the end to say, but I think they've all been said about things that are coming up. Edwin, is there anything I'm missing that you want to add?
The facilitator debrief afterwards.
Okay. Oh, and I also want to thank all the facilitators, everyone who facilitated today. Thank you very much for doing that work,
including yourself.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
So love to you all.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you,
Thanks.
my
Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. See you next week. Bye.
See you next week.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone.